Fame, 1982 to 1987, wasn't just a television series. It was a vibrant, high-energy celebration of dreams, talent, and the relentless pursuit of stardom. Set in the halls of New York's High School for the Performing Arts, the show inspired a generation with its passionate performances, heartfelt stories, and unforgettable music. But while Fame promised that its characters would live forever, the reality has been more bittersweet. Over the years, some of the show's brightest stars have sadly passed away, their lives cut short, but their impact never forgotten. In this moving tribute, we remember the talented actors who brought Fame to life and left behind legacies that continue to shine long after the spotlight has dimmed. Gene Anthony Ray was born on May 24, 1962, in Harlem, New York, an electric place of music and movement, but also a backdrop of hardship and survival. Raised in the shadow of addiction and poverty, Gene's childhood was marred by instability. His mother, a troubled woman with a history of drug offenses, spent time in prison, leaving Gene to navigate his youth alone in a world where talent was never enough and safety was a luxury. He burst into stardom as Leroy Johnson in the 1980s series Fame, a fiery dancer with street-born rhythm and raw charisma. But the Leroy we loved on screen was a mirror of Gene's real self, brilliant, defiant, wounded. His character channeled rage into movement, always dancing like he had something to prove, and he did. Behind the camera, Gene was battling the same demons that gave him life on screen. Gene had no formal training. He had been expelled from New York's High School of the Performing Arts, the very school that Fame was based on. That bitter irony haunted him, like a cruel joke that wouldn't end. Hollywood didn't know how to hold someone like Gene, too honest, too untamed. After the show, his career faltered. He never found another role that truly fit. The industry, which once praised his authenticity, slowly shut its doors as his reputation for partying and erratic behavior grew. Internally, Gene was a storm. Fame had come too fast, without the grounding of support or self-worth. He spiraled, drinking, disappearing, trying to relive the joy of his early years through nightlife and fleeting attention. His personal life was equally fractured. He never married, and close relationships seemed to slip through his fingers, unable to survive the chaos he carried. His sexuality, often speculated on but never publicly embraced, was another unspoken wound in a time when acceptance was rare and silence was survival. In the late 1990s, Gene was diagnosed with HIV, and it marked the quiet end of his dreams. He returned to Harlem, living with his mother once again, the same place his story had begun. The boy who once danced like his life depended on it was now fading, unseen, forgotten by the industry he once lit up. Gene Anthony Ray died on November 14, 2003, from complications related to a stroke and AIDS. He was only 41. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at less than $50,000, a brutal reflection of an industry that had taken what it wanted and left the rest. But numbers could never measure what Gene gave: the power of movement, of fire, of vulnerability carved into every dance step. And beneath it all, the quiet tragedy of a man who was never truly seen for who he was, only for the energy he gave away. Albert Haig was born as Albert Marcuse on October 13, 1920, in Berlin, Germany, a city already unraveling with the rise of Nazism. His father was a psychiatrist, his mother an opera singer, but their cultured life collapsed under the crushing boots of Hitler's regime. As a young Jewish boy, Albert fled with his mother to America, leaving behind a homeland and a sense of safety he would never fully regain. That wound, of exile, of displacement, never healed. It echoed through his music like a ghost. He remade himself in America, taking the name Albert Haig, burying the past like it was a secret shame. Music became his language of survival. He composed with the hunger of someone who had known real fear. In time, he wrote Broadway scores, winning a Tony for Redhead in 1959. But it was never enough. Critics praised him, yet the spotlight always seemed to shine just beside him, not on him. In 1982, Haig took on the role of Benjamin Shorofsky in the TV series Fame. The character, a strict but soulful music teacher, mirrored much of Haig's real self, reserved, haunted, but fiercely devoted to the transformative power of music. Audiences loved Sharovsky, but few knew the man behind him was still struggling with self-worth and decades of invisible grief. Despite his professional success, Haig's personal life was less harmonious. His marriage to vocalist Renée Oren, though lasting, was often strained by his mood swings and the silence he carried from his war-torn youth. They had 2 children, but Haig, like his own father, often seemed emotionally absent, lost in his own head. There were no public scandals, just the slow ache of a man who had seen too much too young and never quite felt at home, even in his adopted country. Behind the professor's gentle gaze on fame was a man who had learned to survive by retreating inward. Albert Haig died on November 12, 2001 from cancer. He was 81. His estimated net worth at the time of death was around $3 million. But his true wealth lay in the music he left behind, layered with pain, memory, and quiet longing. A survivor's symphony, never quite at peace. And Nelson was born on November 27, 1903, in the cold quiet of suburban New York. Little is known of her earliest years, which in itself says something. She was a woman accustomed to the background, even in life. Raised in a working-class family during an era when women were expected to vanish behind husbands and homemaking, and refused to vanish. But the cost of being seen came slowly, and with loneliness. Her career began late by Hollywood standards, shaped more by persistence than luck. For decades, she took on small roles, school teachers, secretaries, librarians, the kind of women the world never stops to remember. She was never glamorous, never famous. But there was something honest in her eyes, and it was that quiet sincerity that eventually led her to fame, where she played Mrs. Berg, the school's nosy but warm-hearted receptionist from 1982 to 1987. Mrs. Berg was often played for comic relief, fumbling phones and forgetting names, but Nelson gave her a gentle dignity. Off-screen, however, the actress lived in almost total obscurity. She never married, had no children, and rarely spoke of her private life. Those who worked with her described her as kind, but distant, always on the periphery, like a figure half-lit on stage. It was as if she'd spent a lifetime waiting for someone to really see her. There were no tell-all memoirs, no scandals, no major headlines. That was Anne's tragedy. She gave her whole life to a craft that mostly looked the other way. In the final years, her health declined quietly. She lived alone, her television reruns offering the only echo of applause she would ever hear. And Nelson passed away on September 12, 1992, at the age of 88. Her net worth at the time was estimated at a modest $250,000, a small sum for a woman who had spent more than half a century in the business of pretending to belong. But for those who watched Fame and saw the flicker of truth behind Mrs. Berg's smile, she left something far more lasting. A whisper of grace in the chaos of a world that often forgets its quietest souls. Morgan Stevens was born as Calvin Morgan Stevens on October 16, 1951, in Knoxville, Tennessee, a southern town laced with quiet dreams and unspoken grief. He lost his father at just 9 years old, an absence that shadowed every part of his childhood. Raised by a single mother, Morgan grew up learning how to suppress pain with silence, how to wear calm like armor. Acting, for him, wasn't a choice, it was a way to finally be seen. After college, he drifted west, chasing a dream that rarely made room for gentleness. Hollywood liked his looks, tall, brooding, handsome, but it never quite knew what to do with the fragility behind his eyes. In 1982, he was cast as David Reardon, a drama teacher in Fame. His character was passionate, principled, a mentor type. And in many ways, it mirrored his own need to guide, to be useful. But behind the camera, Stevens was already growing disillusioned. His stint on the show lasted only a year. The roles that followed, The Waltons, Melrose Place, A Year in the Life, were steady but never star-making. He lived modestly, never chasing celebrity. But in 1996, everything changed. Stevens was involved in a brutal altercation with LAPD officers after a minor traffic incident. The injuries he sustained, both physical and psychological, derailed his life. His acting career all but ended. He sued the city and won a settlement, but the cost was deeper than money could ever fix. He withdrew from the world. No interviews, no comebacks. His phone stopped ringing, the scripts stopped coming. Once lit by ambition, his life faded into seclusion. Friends described him as kind but broken, trapped by a sense of betrayal, both by his industry and by justice. Morgan Stevens died alone in his Los Angeles home on January 26, 2022. He had not been heard from in days. The cause of death was determined to be heart disease. He was 70. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at approximately $500,000. Modest, even meager, by Hollywood standards. But Morgan's story wasn't about money or fame. It was about the cost of being gentle in a brutal world. And about how sometimes, even the strongest spirits quietly disappear. Richard Venture was born Richard Charles Venturella on November 11, 1923, in New York City, a place as restless and unforgiving as the life he would come to lead. He served in the U.S. Navy during World War II, a chapter he rarely spoke about, though the weight of it clung to him long after. Like many men of that era, he returned home with the war still smoldering inside him. Acting became his escape, a place to channel the emotions he never learned to name. His career on stage and screen stretched across decades, yet Richard Venture was never a household name. He was the man in the background, the stern executive, the weathered cop, the no-nonsense bureaucrat. In 1982, he briefly appeared in the series Fame as the school's principal. Though his time on the show was short, his presence was commanding. He played authority figures not because he sought control, but because he understood the burden of carrying order through chaos. Off-screen, Richard's life was complex and marked by emotional turbulence. He married 4 times, including to actress Olivia Cole, yet none of his marriages lasted. Those close to him described a man torn between ambition and emotional distance, someone who could never quite stay anchored in one place, or with one person, for long. His children knew a father often away, lost in rehearsals or on location, chasing roles that never gave back what he poured into them. Despite a long list of credits, All the President's Men, Scent of a Woman, The Days and Nights of Molly Dodd, he remained a working actor, never a star. That reality weighed on him. He once told a friend he felt like a shadow in other people's stories. Richard Venture passed away on December 19, 2017, at the age of 94. His net worth at the time of his death was estimated at around $1 million. He left behind no grand legacy of fame, no tabloid scandals, only the quiet dignity of a man who worked until the end, still seeking a stage where he could finally feel seen. Charles Lane was born as Charles Gerstle Levison on January 26, 1905, in San Francisco, California, a city still recovering from the devastating 1906 earthquake that would haunt his earliest memories. His father, a hardware merchant, struggled to rebuild a business in the rubble, and the Lane household teetered between modest survival and silent despair. As a boy, Charles learned to speak only when spoken to stay out of the way, and to disappear into the pages of books or mimic the voices on the radio. Invisibility became a kind of armor. He never sought stardom. In fact, Charles Lane made a career of not standing out, playing officious clerks, stern lawyers, and crusty bureaucrats in over 300 films and countless TV appearances. His pinched face, biting tone, and humorless demeanor made him the go-to man for roles no one else wanted. Audiences never remembered his name, but they remembered the voice, the sneer, the glasses. In Fame, 1983, he played a guest board member, uncredited, overlooked, but perfectly typecast as the gatekeeper of someone else's dreams. That was his life, the man who opened no doors, only stood beside them. Lane was a perfectionist, often misunderstood as cold. Beneath the surface, though, was a man weighed down by self-doubt. He feared mediocrity more than failure, yet he never felt worthy of praise. Directors admired his reliability, but rarely his soul. He watched as peers found glory, while he remained typecast, boxed in by his own consistency. Even success felt like a cage. His personal life was marked by quiet endurance. He married Ruth Covell in 1931, and the two stayed together until her death in 2002. Their marriage endured, not because of passion, but through routine and unspoken loyalty. They had 2 children, though Lane's long hours and emotional detachment made him more of a shadow than a father. In later years, as his friends passed away and roles stopped coming, he confessed in rare interviews to feeling forgotten long before I was ever gone. Charles Lane died on July 9, 2007, at the age of 102, outliving nearly everyone he'd ever worked with. He left behind an estimated net worth of $2 million, not from fame, but from decades of steady, thankless labor. In the end, the man who made a career of being unnoticed left quietly, his legacy a mosaic of anonymous faces that somehow formed the spine of Hollywood's golden age. Dick Miller was born on December 25, 1928, in the Bronx, New York, into a world that didn't promise much, especially for a Jewish boy coming of age during the lean, grim years of the Great Depression. His parents worked menial jobs just to keep the lights on. From a young age, Dick learned that dreams were a luxury his family couldn't afford, but he dreamed anyway, in the quiet hours between school and sleep, often pretending he was someone else, someone bigger, someone remembered. He started out wanting to be a writer, even earned degrees in psychology and literature, but it was acting that tugged at him with a strange and unrelenting pull. He never became a leading man, never wanted to be one. Instead, Dick carved out a space for himself as the unforgettable everyman in hundreds of roles. From cranky shopkeepers to foul-mouthed neighbors, he was the man on the fringe of the story, never the hero, never the villain, but always the soul of the scene. His guest appearances in Fame between 1983 and 1986 were brief but potent, another thread in a tapestry woven from grit and character. But with a career so long came bitter irony. He was loved by directors but invisible to fame. Roger Corman adored him. Joe Dante practically built films around him. Yet Dick walked through life largely unrecognized, a cult favorite to a loyal few, a footnote to the many. He joked about it, but those close to him knew the rejection stung. The unreturned phone calls. The younger actors who passed him by. The long months between gigs. There were times he questioned his worth, wondering whether being that guy in every movie was any different from being nobody at all. He was married to Lainey Miller from 1965 until his death, a rare thread of constancy in a career defined by instability. They had 1 daughter, and though Dick was frequently working or auditioning, he tried, in his own awkward way, to be present. Theirs was a modest life, no red carpets, no mansions, just scripts piled on kitchen tables, and dinners interrupted by last-minute callbacks. Lainey often said he carried his disappointment like a coat he never took off, even when smiling. Dick Miller died on January 30, 2019, in Toluca Lake, California, at the age of 90. His net worth at the time was estimated at $1 million, built not from stardom, but from a lifetime of small parts that meant everything to those who watched closely. He died the way he lived, off-screen, quietly, his name barely trending. Yet his absence was deeply felt by those who knew that the soul of cinema often lived in its shadows. Carmine Caridi was born on January 23, 1934, in New York City, into a rough-edged Italian-American household where love was often tough, and survival meant keeping your head down. His parents were working-class immigrants, burdened with long hours and little money. Carmine grew up with thick skin and sharper dreams, hoping to escape the concrete chokehold of his neighborhood through acting, a profession he considered both dangerous and divine. He was tall, loud, and built like a bouncer, traits that landed him roles as mobsters, cops, and tough guys. Hollywood never quite knew what to do with him. He came agonizingly close to stardom, even being cast originally as Sonny Corleone in The Godfather, a role that could have changed his life, but he was recast due to his height. That moment haunted him. He spoke of it often, not bitterly, but like someone recounting a ship he just missed boarding, one that sailed on without him forever. Caridi found steady work throughout the 70s and 80s, including his role as Lou Mackey in Fame from 1982 to 1983, where he played a warm, street-smart janitor, perhaps the closest role to his real self, rough on the outside, unexpectedly tender within. But the big roles never came. His face was known, his name forgotten. He was always almost. But the worst blow came later. In the 2000s, he became the first Academy member expelled for leaking Oscar screeners, a scandal that shattered his reputation. He had claimed innocence, saying he didn't understand the technology or the risk. Still, it was a fall from grace that cut deeply. Hollywood turned its back. Carmine never fully recovered from the shame. It wasn't just a career-ending event, it was a final betrayal from the industry he'd devoted his life to. His personal life remained mostly private. Twice divorced, he lived much of his later years alone. Though he had children, his relationships were distant, strained by years of work, travel, and the emotional walls he often hid behind. Those who knew him say he was generous but guarded, funny but melancholic. You could hear in his voice the echoes of someone who'd come close to greatness, only to watch it slip away, again and again. Carmine Caridi died on May 28, 2019, at the age of 85, after falling into a coma following a fall. His estimated net worth at the time of his death was around $500,000, a modest sum for a man who stood on the edges of fame for over 5 decades. He died with no awards, no tributes, just the quiet memory of a man who almost made it, who never stopped trying, and who carried his regrets. Which character from Fame, TV series 1982 to 1987, holds a special place in your heart? How does it make you feel knowing that some of the beloved cast members are no longer with us? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below. If you've been enjoying this content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching.